If you spend any time at all watching the news, at some point you will hear some negative news concerning President Trump. And it's been a trend since he first entered office. Let me share a few quotes from two very interesting articles. Well, I thought they were interesting. The first one I'll share is from a 2017 article in the Washington Examiner. How negative was press coverage of President Trump's first 100 days in office? For more than that of Barack Obama, George W. Bush, or Bill Clinton, according to a new report from the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. The Harvard scholars analyzed the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and the main newscasts, not talk shows, of CBS, CNN, Fox, and NBC during Trump's initial time in office. They found, to no one's surprise, that Trump absolutely dominated news coverage in the first 100 days. And then they found that news coverage was solidly negative, 80% negative among those outlets studied versus 20% positive. Again, that was back in 2017. My next quote comes from a Fox News report dated August 17, 2020. The evening newscasts on ABC, CBS, and NBC have been 150 times more negative when covering President Trump compared to presumptive 2020 Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, according to a new study. The Media Research Center analyzed all statements made by reporters, anchors, and nonpartisan sources such as experts or voters made on CBS Evening News, NBC Nightly News, and ABC's World News Tonight from June 1st through July 31st. MRC Research Director Rich Noyes, who conducted the study, feels that millions of viewers are witnessing the most biased presidential campaign coverage in modern media history. That last comment really caught my attention. Is the mainstream media only interested in making President Trump look bad for ideological reasons? Well, sure, that may be part of the story, but it's certainly not the whole story. Oh no. Bear with me and I will fill in the blanks right after this word from my... This podcast is brought to you by Black History Quiz because it takes more than a month to learn our history. History is not black and white. It's complicated. America was built on slave labor, yet blacks owned slaves as well. The Republican Party was founded to abolish slavery, but today most blacks vote Democrat. And sometimes, just sometimes, African kings marry white. No matter the race, people are complicated, filled with contradictions, and change with the times. To view history through the lenses of today's culture cheats the learner of the full story. Black History Quiz is a newsletter that shares facts you might not have learned in school and certainly did not learn from mainstream media. Black History Quiz educates, sparks debate, and often puts history in a brand new light. Visit blackhistoryquiz.com and subscribe to the weekly newsletter. No matter your perspective of history, you will not be disappointed. blackhistoryquiz.com. When it comes to negative news coverage, President Donald Trump is an easy target, but to be fair, there are plenty of negative news reports to go around. Why is that? Well, no big mystery there. They do it for the money. Let me share a few quotes about the media from a variety of sources that are sad but nonetheless true. The links to all my sources can be found at jimstroud.com. Nielsen ratings account for 50% of negative news statistics. Most journalists attribute the Nielsen ratings as the biggest reason that news reports are either sensationalized or are simply inaccurate. The ratings boost viewership, which in turn attracts advertising. So as a result, many media outlets stress the importance of delivering negative and emotionally jarring news reports. This burden falls squarely on the shoulders of journalists who feel pressure to deliver over-exaggerated news stories. Another point. Negative media coverage reports show that negative words such as bad or worst and never are 30% more effective at catching people's attention as opposed to positive. The studies also reveal that negative words improve the average click-through rate. Headlines with negative bias showed a 63% higher result when compared to positive ones. One more point. In theory, the news should be an unbiased presentation of the truth, right? However, in reality, the news is anything but that. Studies show that the majority of articles and represent a media distortion of reality. Contrary evidence is often omitted, and 79% of media articles have been shown to be divisive. So, putting Trump in a negative light and bad news in general makes news organizations money. Such being the case, it's no wonder why it continues. But I have to ask, why does the public put up with it? Isn't all the negativity on the news having an adverse effect on the viewers? Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Yes, it is. But on a perverse level, we, the public, buy into it. We crave it. After all, they would not feed us so much bad news if we were not willing to consume it all. And that's not speculation. That's science. Two more quotes for you. This first one from Psychology Today, and it references a psychological study where people were shown positive news, negative news, and news that was emotionally neutral. Let's see here. Yes. As we predicted, those who watched the negative news bulletins all reported being significantly more anxious and sadder after watching those bulletins than those people who watched either the positive or neutral news bulletins. But what was more interesting was the effect that watching negative news had on people's worries. We asked what their worry was at the time, and we then asked them to think about this worry during a structured interview. We found that those people who had watched the negative news bulletin spent more time thinking and talking about their worry and were more likely to catastrophize their worry than people in the other two groups. Catastrophizing is when you think about a worry so persistently that you begin to make it seem much more worse than it was at the outset and much more worse than it is in reality. A tendency to make mountains out of molehills. So, not only are negatively balanced news broadcasts likely to make you sadder and more anxious, they are also likely to exacerbate your own personal worries and anxieties. Bad news makes money. Too much bad news makes you anxious, sad, and full of worry. So, why can't we give it up? Well, Time Magazine has it for us. While increased anxiety and stress are reason enough to be wary of overdoing it when it comes to the news, these and other mental health afflictions can also fuel physical ailments. Stress-related hormones named cortisol have been linked to inflammation associated with rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and other serious health concerns. So if the evidence suggests the news can stress people out, why do we keep going back for more? For one thing, it's entertaining, Davey says. The human brain is also wired to pay attention to information that scares or unsettles us, a concept known as negativity bias. In a state of nature, our survival depends on finding rewards and avoidance takes priority, says Loretta Bruning, a former professor of management at California State University East Bay and author of Habits of a Happy Brain. Bruning explains that the human brain is attracted to troubling information because it's programmed to detect threats, not to overlook them. This can make it hard for us to ignore the negatives and seek out the positives around us, she says. Our brain is predisposed to go negative, and the news we consume reflects this. This is too funny to me. Funny, ironic, not funny, haha. It's like we're caught in a parasitic relationship with the media. We know it's not good for us to consume too much news because it has a negative effect on our mental health, and yet our brains are wired to seek out the kind of bad news that is bad for us. I'll leave you with this. A Russian newspaper, the City Reporter, decided to publish only positive stories in their publication for a day. The social experiment was undertaken in order to see the effect negative versus positive news stories have on people. Stories were all written from a positive stance. They included things like how the roads were clear despite heavy snow. The end result of the experiment led to the newspaper losing 2/3 of their readership that day. Yes, 2/3 of their readership was lost when they published only positive news for a single day. Yeah, the newspaper workers were just as shocked as you are. The Things I Think About podcast. If you love what you heard, hate what you heard, or don't know what you just heard, I want to know about it. Drop me an email. I can be reached at Jim Stroud, that's JIMSTROUD, @jimstroud.com. So, until next time, bye-bye.